Hello, and welcome to our webinar about how PiPA can help performing arts organisations embed the new ACE investment principles, particularly if you are planning to apply for NPO status or are seeking Arts Council England project grants. I'm Matt Harper-Hardcastle, the PiPA Charter Programme Manager, and with me today are Anna Enol-Danilov, co-founder and joint CEO of PiPA, and Joe Dackham, fundraising and development consultant at Artreach. Before we start, there will be time for a Q&A at the end where you can ask questions or do so through the chat. And as always, if you have any further questions or you'd like to talk to us directly, please get in touch with me at matt@pipacampaign.com.
So today, in a moment, I will give you a brief overview of PiPA and the work that we do. And obviously, for those who don't know our work yet or haven't really heard about us, before I then hand you over to Joe, who will outline the role that investment principal support organizations, or short IPSOs, can play and how working with organizations like PiPA can support you as a potential NPO or Arts Council England grant recipient going forward. We will then introduce you to the PiPA Charter Programme framework before Matt will guide you through a close-up of the investment principles, focusing on inclusion and relevance and dynamism. And as I said, at the end, we will then have a time for a Q&A. So let's briefly talk about PiPA, Parents and Carers in Performing Arts. We support performing arts organisations across the UK to implement effective strategies to ensure that they're able to attract and retain a more diverse and flexible workforce that is inclusive of parents and carers. As a charity, we address disadvantages, we lobby for change, and we map out practical ways of working because we believe a truly world-class performing arts is inclusive of all talents and circumstances. In PiPA, we conduct rigorous research which underpins everything that we do. We work collaboratively with performing arts industry bodies to develop and implement sustainable strategies for change and promote best practice employment. We now have over 70 partners, which range from unions, membership organizations, as well as theatre, music and dance companies from across the UK. As a response to our research, we have developed, in collaboration with the performing arts industry, the PiPA Best Practice Charter. Matt will put a link to that into the chat. The Best Practice Charter is a set of 10 guiding principles to help guide the industry to become a better and more inclusive workplace. And to support performing arts organisations to work towards the Charter and work towards better practice, we've also developed the PiPA Charter Programme, which you will hear about more later today, which helps organisations to embed more inclusive policies and practices in order to strengthen their business resilience. Oh, we're on the wrong slide. There we go. So let's look at some of our research. Some of the key challenges that performing arts workers face, and I'm sure many of you will recognise those, are the irregular working patterns that people regularly face, the last-minute engagement, and the changes to schedules. Then there is the long hours, the regular weekend and bank holiday work. Then there's touring and the frequent changes of location. And of course, the intense preparation, rehearsal, or training time to keep up skills. In dance, you need to combine that, of course, also with the need to rest in order to prevent injury. Combine all of that with caring responsibilities, and you've got the additional challenge to find flexible, out of hours, affordable, and of course appropriate child or elder care. And one thing that is important to always keep in mind is that caring responsibilities cut across all protected characteristics. This means that you can be a single disabled parent, or you could be a carer for a family member with dementia, maybe from an Asian background. And we also need to acknowledge that caring responsibilities, unfortunately, still predominantly fall on women. Our research has consistently shown that caring responsibilities impact career development or even career continuation. In our surveys, we had found that 76% of people regularly turn down work because of their caring responsibilities. And for freelancers, who we all know make a very high percentage of our workforce, it's even higher. It's 85% of freelancers regularly turn down work because of their caring responsibilities. We also found that parents and carers, on average, earn £3,000 a year less than those without caring responsibilities, which is actually significant if you take the high cost of care into account. To mitigate this, parents and carers heavily rely on social capital to manage their caring responsibilities, be it through a supportive partner or a family and friend network. And this is a privilege in itself. That means that those without those privileges will find it most difficult to remain in their career if there's no external support, such as from an employer, for example. Now, COVID magnified these inequalities. Before the pandemic, we had found that 4 out of 10 people who had left our industry did so because of their caring responsibilities. However, our latest COVID research showed that 72% of parents and carers are now considering to leave the industry. Women, disabled parents and carers, and those from Asian, Black, or ethnically diverse backgrounds are most affected. Now, this is an immense talent loss that the performing arts is potentially facing, and it shows the urgent need of putting strategies in place to retain this talent. I'll hand you over to Matt now, who will be giving you a little introduction to the charter program before we look at the other elements.
Thank you. So, as Anna mentioned, to address the findings in our research and enable performing arts organisations to embed more inclusive and accessible practices, we developed the PiPA Charter Programme. So the Charter Programme is a data-driven and industry-led framework which enables a performing arts organisation to review their family-friendly policies, working practices and resources, and take supported, practical steps to strengthen these in line with their own capacity and current agenda. So we currently have 55 performing arts organisations taking part in the Charter Programme, covering a real number of disciplines and sizes, from those such as the National Theatre, RSC, English Touring Theatre, Liverpool Everyman and Playhouse, who have been with us for many, many years, to organisations who have joined us more recently, such as Balbia Singh Dance Company, People Dancing, Leeds Heritage Theatre, and Hoffe Schechter Dance Company, and many, many more. Being part of this network means that you have access to the learning and the support of other charter partners, which is invaluable when taking these steps. The structure, which we'll outline in more detail a little bit later on, provides your organisation with a mechanism to continually review and improve to achieve whatever ambitions you have in terms of parent and carer inclusion. Before we hand over to Joe, I'd just like to outline some of the outcomes organisations experience when they take part in the Charter Programme. So some of these might be really helpful for you to think about as part of your ambition when you're becoming an MPO and embedding these into your 3-year plan. So some outcomes, when taking part in the charter programme, you will see an increase in your awareness and understanding of the needs of your parent and carer workforce. The policies and practices you will implement will increase diversity of your workforce. As Anna said, caring responsibilities cut right across every other protected characteristic. You will be able to attract and retain talent from a much wider talent pool. You will see more women progress into senior positions. You will demonstrate compliance with sector standards for funding requirements and develop a more dynamic infrastructure capable of constantly evolving with the changing social, environmental, and economic factors. So that's sort of a quick introduction to the charter programme and some outcomes that you might want to consider, but we'll come back to the structure and the process a little bit later on.
Thank you, Matt. I will hand you over now to Jo Dackham, who is the fundraising and development consultant at Artreach. And at PiPA, we've actually worked with Artreach for a number of years now and benefited greatly from Jo's insight and understanding of the Arts Council requirements. So, Jo, I'll hand over to you. I see. Let's see. Jo, can you get your camera working?
That's better.
Perfect.
Sorry,
Sorry
yes,
about
you
that.
had to enable my unmute there. So
I did. I'm
I think you can
sorry.
hear me now. Hopefully you hear me and see me. Thank you very much. Yeah, hello everyone. So yeah, my name is Jo Dackham. I'm an arts and heritage consultant for Artreach. Artreach is a charity, event producer and consultancy. Artreach is an NPO Band 2, and we are currently supporting a number of organisations with developing their NPO applications. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the sort of new expectations that the Arts Council have about NPOs and these IPSOs that we've mentioned, and also about project grants a little bit as well. So as part of an NPO application, the Arts Council will be asking the applicants to complete an investment principles plan to demonstrate their plans and how they expect to progress to embed those investment principles into their work. This is the new part of the Let's Create strategy that the Arts Council produced. The new part is very much focusing on these investment principles that they want to see being embedded into all organisations that they fund. And it applies to project grants as well, because project grants are also now written through the lens of the investment principles. That you also need to address those investment principles in your project grant applications, which is new and different from how it used to be. With investment principles, the emphasis really is on continuous improvement. So at the point of application, the Arts Council are not necessarily expecting you to have achieved all those investment principles or met those, but they expect you to have a plan for how you will improve from wherever you're starting from, how you will improve. So key to that is knowing where you're starting from. So having an idea of your baseline of where you're starting from with those 4 investment principles and how you're actually going to progress. And if you're applying for an NPO, that's a 3-year commitment to actually develop and improve all those investment principles over those 3 years. Let's talk a little bit about the support organisation role as well, because this has also changed slightly. So you may have heard of the SSO, as it used to be called, the sector support organisation, and organisations like Julie's Bicycle are one of those that support other NPOs and organisations on developing some of their work. This has changed to what's now called the IPSO, so the Investment Principles Sector Support Organisation, the IPSO. The key thing with that is the reason they've changed that name is because they want these support organisations to specifically focus on developing the investment principles, to work with other organizations and NPOs on how they can support you to develop your investment principles and embed them in your work. So it's very much focusing on that. So when you do your application for NPO, you'll see that there's a question that asks you, are you applying as an NPO or as an IPSO? And so obviously the Arts Council is inviting organisations to become those IPSOs to actually support other NPOs with embedding those investment principles. So that's what we're expecting to happen, to have this very specific role for IPSOs to support NPOs and other organisations funded by the Arts Council. So the Arts Council has clearly stated in its guidance that they expect NPOs to work together with IPSOs. There's a big emphasis in this round about working in partnership as well, generally, taking advantage of expertise from other organisations and much more partnership working. The other thing the Arts Council is really emphasising in this round is the use of data and evidence. They really want to see that organisations are making their decisions informed by robust data, solid data and evidence. So there's always been a heavy burden of data collection being an NPO. That is likely to continue because they're really emphasising that data is what they want to see. So there's something to really think about there about the burden of data collection. With the investment principles, the Arts Council is expecting NPOs to define their own data collection as well. So there's also a burden there to actually work out what you're going to collect. Now there's pros and cons of that. I think in the past, the Arts Council has been a little bit criticised that they wanted NPOs to collect lots of data, and some of that data wasn't always relevant to each organisation. It was a sort of one size fits all that didn't really work for everybody. So it seems like they've changed that and they're asking for something a bit more bespoke, which is a good thing because you can set your own data targets. The con of that is that it means it's the NPO's responsibility to come up with the measurements. What are you actually going to measure and collect in terms of investment principles? So these are areas that IPSOs could support. They could support with frameworks for data collection. They could support with tools for data collection that are already there. They can help you benchmark with other organisations as well, because IPSOs will be working nationally, so they'll have lots of networking going on. So there are things there that, it is a burden of data collection, but I think you can think about how IPSOs could actually help relieve some of that burden with some of the resources that they have. Of course, IPSOs will also have very specific expertise. They'll have a very specific role that they've defined of how they can support investment principles. So they're going to really focus on that and develop their expertise in that particular area. And especially for smaller organisations, that's going to be very difficult for you to do in-house and probably quite costly. So again, it comes back to this idea of partnership working. Is there an organisation out there like an IPSO that actually could support you with very specific areas much better than trying to do that in-house? That might be a way that provides a better efficiency. And so, have a think about that, both in terms of actually getting the skills and the expertise, but also that's probably a more cost-effective way of tackling some of these things as well. So it's quite good for your business plan. So an IPSO can probably strengthen, planning to work with an IPSO could strengthen your application for an NPO or for a project grant, because you can say that you are working with an organisation that can provide that robust data collection, that evaluation. The Arts Council is really looking for what I call a cycle of improvement and progress. So they want you to know where you're starting from, have a plan for how you're going to improve, and then how are you going to measure that improvement. And then it cycles round again to say, well, OK, you're here now, how are you going to improve again? And so it keeps on going on a cycle. So thinking about cycles of improvement. And again, this is something that working with an IPSO or a support organisation might be able to help you with. of how you can actually put that in place as a framework. And IPSOs could help you with things like benchmarking to really show how your quality is improving as you go, to show that improvement. They might set standards, national standards that you could work towards and benchmark yourself against. They might also have resources that they've developed that support your data collection and its analysis, but also resources that might help you create action plans as well, to really, have something that looks like a really well planned cycle of improvement. So, some IPSOs and PiPA is one, already have some data collection tools. PiPA is an organization, there are no IPSOs yet, but organizations that support others, some of them already have well-developed data collection tools that you can have a look at. And I would expect when we get IPSOs, there will be more of those as well. So for an Arts Council project grant application, as I said, these are now written through the lens of the investment principles. So I think it's quite difficult to present your art project through that lens in a way, and there are things there that you could think about. So, for example, there's an area on inclusivity is one of the investment principles, and you might want to have something in there about how you're making sure you're inclusive of the people that you involve. That might be people you're recruiting to do your project, to deliver your project, or it might be people that you're reaching to participate. But considering your recruitment practices and how you're going to make sure they're inclusive. And again, that's something that a support organisation might be able to help you with. Thinking about quality and ambition as well is another investment principle. How are you actually going to measure that quality and demonstrate that with data? Again, that's something a support organisation maybe could have some ideas or resources to help you. And dynamism is another one, I think, another investment principle, and that's really about flexibility and the ability to strengthen your position, to be resilient and to grow, and consider how your application is part of a bigger plan to develop. So, it's a project, but you might want to consider that in a wider picture of how that's part of your development for dynamism. And again, support organizations might have ways they can help you with that cycle of improvement, with data collection, with really demonstrating that you're making this kind of progress. So I think it's also relevant to project grants in that way. And finally, I think if you are applying to be an MPO, think about how you budget for all this work. Data collection is a burden, and there's a financial implication to that. Somebody's got to do the work, and that costs money. So there was an Arts Council briefing about this, and I specifically asked the question: are the Arts Council happy to see people putting in their NPO budgets a budget line for data collection and monitoring, because it is a burden? And the Arts Council spokesperson said they're absolutely happy to see that. They would expect a budget to reflect the cost of data collection as part of an MPO application. And actually, I think that that's a real strength if you can put that in as a budget line, because it shows you've got an actual plan that you're committed to, with finance behind it, to really embed these investment principles, that you're going to do that work. So you've got a plan and a strategy, and it's properly costed in. So consider that. And the Arts Council is also looking for value for money as well. So if you've got a budget line in there, but it's to maybe work with other support organisations who might actually be able to give you better resources than the ones you could develop yourself, that's probably better value for money. So I think you can make that argument as well. And think of it as a 3-year commitment as well. So as I've said, the Arts Council are expecting this sort of cycle of improvement, that year on year you're going to improve and embed your investment principles more. So think about that over the whole 3 years of your NPO application, your budgeting, that you've got that commitment over the 3 years. It's value added because you're working in partnership, perhaps with a support organisation, but you've got that 3-year commitment. It's planned into your whole plan, so it looks strong and robust and real. and convincing, hopefully. So those are my thoughts on how I think this new process works, and how IPSOs or support organisations could help with some of those areas that you need to develop. Back to Anna.
Thank you, Jo. I think that's really interesting, and it's I think it's important to kind of think about this new. Well, it's not that new, but it's sort of this increased focus on collaboration and network, as well as actually the long-term investment, which is really interesting. As a matter of fact, it sort of reminds me a little bit actually of the charter partners that we currently have, because we certainly have found that they actually commit to our program on a long-term basis, and that's not only because effective change can actually take some time, but it's also because the program enables organizations to sort of go on a journey and then discover, once they've addressed maybe one area that they wanted to address initially to better support parents and carers, it opens up the road to more exploration and the desire to tackle other areas. So sort of thinking ahead that it's actually not one thing you want to do, but it's actually a journey is really, I think, is really key and really interesting. We will come back to Jo as well at the end. So if you've got any direct questions to her, as I said, we're going to have some time at the end. So let's look into the charter program that we offer in more detail. So I'd like to give you a little bit of an overview, first of all, of how our charter program runs, or the framework of it, and how the program in itself actually already responds to some of the thinking of the investment principles that the Arts Council is presenting. So the charter program provides a cyclical structure that enables organizations to embed some of the investment principles through a monitoring and an evaluation framework that has 4 stages. It starts here at the top with understanding your organization. So at the start of the charter program, each organization takes the PiPA baseline survey. And this is a key tool which helps you identify your strengths as well as areas for development through data collection. The baseline survey is a comprehensive audit of your current policies and working practices, as well as resources you may already have in place, that provides you then with the data that you need in order to identify your strategy and next steps. It sort of shows maybe some of the gaps, but also some of the blind spots that you can then address. We also support organizations to deliver focus groups and staff surveys alongside to help identify the key areas that they need addressing in terms of their parent and carer workforce. And this data collection is one of the things that Jo was just talking about. It's a key and essential tool to actually help you collect key data for your organization. The next stage is developing a strategy and setting targets, which is through data-driven recommendations to inform your strategy. So upon completion of the baseline survey, you will receive a report which comes with practical recommendations to enable you to set clear targets and create an action plan to then drive the change, as well as help you monitor your progress. Each recommendation that we made comes with a suggestion of resources and case studies to support then the next phase, which is implementation. So this next phase here at the bottom of the screen is business model innovation, and this is where you put your plan into action. Our toolkit of practical resources, which have got sample policies, how-to guide, case studies, and other examples of best practice, will enable you to then take informed steps to reach your ambition and to make sure that the practices you put in place are inclusive and appropriate to your organization. And this is where innovation happens, where you can test, trial, and adapt new ways of working that are sustainable to your specific business requirements and, of course, to your workforce and community's needs. The business model innovation helps your organization to become more agile and able to actually adapt and respond to future challenges or current challenges, as well as keep your organization on par with what other organizations are already offering within the industry. Supporting you throughout this whole process, of course, is our charter program manager, as well as the wider PiPA network of performing arts organizations who share their direct experiences and learning. And here is what Joe was talking about as well, being part of a wider network and learning from others and share learning and share resources with other organizations who are also on the same journey. So once your model is implemented, we come to the reviewing stage. We support all of our charter partners to review, reflect, and evaluate internally, and then share their learning externally through case studies, as well as talking about their experiences at some of our seminars and obviously at public events. And by embedding your learning and sharing your experience, organizations actually become advocates for specific family-friendly practices and can start inspire others to replicate. This last part of the reviewing process, or the very last part of this reviewing and learning process, is also to identify new areas of development, to set the new targets, again, driven by your organizational data and insight, setting you then again on the new cycle of the charter program by identifying new targets, a new action plan, and business model innovation. And interestingly, this whole cycle very much echoes the Arts Council's ambition and quality framework, where you understand where you are, you set your strategies and targets driven by data, you measure your progression before you set new targets based on the new data. I will hand you over to Matt now, who will talk to you in more detail about examples of the investment principles and the policies and practices that we promote, and how they respond to the investment principles of inclusion and relevance and dynamism, simply because these reflect the work that we do best. However, as I'm sure that Matt will point out, many of our recommendations actually cover other principles as well, so ambition and quality, or even environmental responsibilities. But I'll let him explain that. Matt, over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, just as the charter program can overlap into different areas, some of the areas that we will outline now will also overlap into different investment principles and their pillars. The more we discuss, the more you will see how recommended practices align to more than one investment principle, which is really important to know. This is not about reinventing the wheel or creating something new for everything that you want to achieve. Instead, it's about having a really coherent approach in thinking through how each element of your ambition speaks to another. So we'll start with inclusion and relevance, as this is probably the most appropriate or most obvious to the work of PiPA, and it's central to what we're already striving for. So this breaks down into the three pillars of communities, workforce leadership and governance, and the creative case for diversity, which I'd just like to break down and give you a flavour of how the charter programme can support you in each one. So we'll start with communities. There are many tools within the charter programme which will support you to understand the challenges and needs of your parent and carer workforce, including sample monitoring forms, example staff surveys, and resources on how to host events such as staff networks or open coffee mornings to engage new parents and carers. Through this, you will gain on-the-ground insight to shape your strategy going forward, ensuring that it is fit for purpose. Governance is explored a lot within the baseline survey, supporting a full review of your parental and caring related policies, but also understanding and harnessing the role of boards and senior leaders in their implementation. So, just as an example, one of our newer charter partners was presenting an enhanced maternity policy to their board, which we were able to support them with through our best practice policies and through our own research. And through this process, we could assist them in identifying the board's role in returning senior leaders from maternity leave. Because of this, now their chair is actually leading on the creation of a new resource with us, capturing their new approach in returning senior leaders from maternity leave. And finally, within this investment principle is the creative case for diversity. As we've said, caring responsibilities cut across all backgrounds that creative practitioners and cultural workers come from, as well as disciplines and art forms. The inclusive working practices that the Charter Programme recommends have the ability to support the full diversity of the workforce and therefore lead to programmes and activities that are relevant and representative of the communities that you serve. Being able to engage and retain creatives with caring responsibilities from diverse backgrounds will ultimately influence your creative output. So, to enable this, the Charter Programme provides recommendations, examples, guides, and case studies on a number of areas. So, how to review the language, formats, and processes surrounding opportunities and job vacancies to increase the reach and access for candidates. How to create meaningful and inclusive professional development programs to maintain and again increase the talent pool that will ultimately influence the diversity of your creative output, and how to review roles for flexibility, how to implement flexible working, such as job shares and remote working, and how to really understand how planning plays an integral role in retaining the talent of your workforce. So, examples in this area include support with advanced scheduling or truncated rehearsal processes. Implementing these practices goes to understanding your community. So, right back to that first pillar. Only by first understanding need can an informed approach be put in place. So, for example, our charter partner, Birds of Paradise, found out through consulting their team that certain practices, such as truncated rehearsals, supported both their disabled and parenting care workforce. They consulted their workforce, adjusted their practices in relation to this information, and therefore their creative output was increased, improved because of this. So there's sort of a process of start to finish of those pillars. So now let's look at dynamism. This is really about embedding inclusive policies and working practices that make your business more agile and able to respond to ongoing challenges both now and in the future. So the Charter Programme encourages innovative practices and resources that, if implemented before they are needed, allow organisations to be agile and prepared to respond to their workforce's needs. So the first pillar is mission and business model. Engagement within the charter program will influence your business model, and therefore reflecting on this will support you in understanding how you are contributing to this investment principle. It's really all about asking, what do we need now to achieve our ambition in the future? And that's what the charter program supports. We've been supporting many organisations to, for example, write their children in the workplace policy and their time off for dependence policies, as in light of COVID, this need and these conversations are coming up more and more. So now they're looking at what they need and preparing for it now, but then they've got those policies for the future, as will requests for flexible working and remote working, which again we've facilitated through our flexible working toolkit and our own remote working toolkit. One final example under this heading is our recommendation of a PiPA pot. So this is a ring-fence budget that can be accessed in caring-related emergencies. Many partners have commented on how in the past they have supported caring related emergencies, but this has been through a sort of make, do and mend approach that wasn't straightforward, was highly pressurised because it needed to happen then and there, but also that it probably couldn't be replicated in the future because there was no systems and there was no reflections on it. Therefore, establishing a PiPA pot, its usage and parameters means that there is a robust system in place for these instances. It might not be needed right away or even regularly, but it is in place and established, ready for when it is needed. And that really is what the charter program is all about, making sure an organisation is as prepared as it can be. Moving on to people and skills within dynamism. Within this investment principle, organisations are asked to invest in their workforce development consistently over time to ensure the knowledge, skills and experience of their staff are fit for purpose and up to date. The Charter Programme provides the framework to review how comprehensive the reach is for your inclusive working practices. So the Charter Programme really prompts important questions that you may want to address in your NPO application and think, how are we going to work through this over the 3 years? So do you have transparent, equitable employment and management policies across the business? Are training and development opportunities made accessible to those working on flexible patterns? Are supportive working practices consistently implemented in all departments? We often find that there are provisions in place for certain departments, so office staff, but these provisions aren't in place for backstage or on-stage roles. So how can you level that within your plan? And in addition to this, another prompt is, are these practices designed to meet the needs of freelancers? So how do these provisions map out between your employed staff and the freelancers that you engage? And finally, within Dynamism, using tech and data. So PiPA's charter program provides data-driven insights, as we've said, as well as progress measurements that you can share with stakeholders and with funders. We support you to collect the right evidence and effectively ask questions of your data in a structured manner to support decision making and inform the development of your strategy. The charter program will also identify key areas of technology that can be implemented to meet the needs of parents and carers, so such as the use of remote access. Finally, this pillar calls right back to communities at the start of inclusion and relevance. Do you capture data on caring responsibilities through your monitoring forms and use this information to inform your strategy? Again, we have sample forms to support you to gather this data and then to use it to shape the work that you will carry out during your ACE grant period. So those are two key investment principles that we as PiPA focus on in our work, but we are astutely aware of the other two, ambition and quality and environmental responsibility. So before we go into questions, I just wanted to provide a quick example of how one specific area of work within the Charter programme is already contributing to a number of investment principles for current Charter partners. And this example is remote working. So remote working has become an increasingly implemented practice. Many charter partners surveyed their staff as they returned to work from lockdown to understand the need of this practice for their workforce. But this was also bolstered by our own COVID research, which demonstrated the perceptions of remote working across the industry as a whole. So organisations could be informed and ambitious in what they thought they could implement. By us providing the relevant tools, how-to guides and sample policies, we then supported organisations to analyse roles for the potential of remote working, identifying ways to trial these and eventually fully embed that practice into different departments. When embedded to its fullest, remote working has a number of benefits in making your work more inclusive. potential increased diversity in candidates applying for your roles, improved work-life balance, and a mechanism which can support flexibility in how roles can be fulfilled. Remote working is a practice which makes your business model more agile to respond to future needs and challenges. This could be parent and carer specific, such as responding to childcare emergencies or any future school closures, for example, but has wider implications for the delivery of your work, such as being able to work off-site during any capital projects or being able to interview and audition from any location. And finally, remote working has a capacity to have a positive impact on the environment by reducing the workforce's carbon footprint through a reduction in commuting. So that's just a little example of how the work that's already included within the charter programme can be understood or expanded on to align with the different investment principles. So I'm going to stop there, as that's a lot of information, and I think maybe we'll open that up to any questions or conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. And I think that was quite a good overview, especially on these two investment principles. I would like to, we've got 10 minutes, well, 8 minutes left for questions, and I would love to invite questions, obviously either to me, Matt, but also to Joe, who is here, and to give us a great insight. I've got, unfortunately, it comes up as the Purple Ladies. I don't have your actual name, but please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Anna. It's Kumara from the Purple Ladies. We met at the Mother House a few years ago.
Oh, yes, we have. Hello.
Yes, hey. I just, thanks for the presentation today. I just have a question in regards, so what I'm understanding is that what you're saying, that if an organization is applying to be an NPO, to budget in specific things such as data collection or sort of like the idea of implementing change within your organization, that is reflected within the budget. And what you're saying, that you are an organization that offer that support to organizations to work with other organizations. And my question is related to, let's say, if the Purple Ladies were to ask you to support us, whether that would need to be budgeted in.
I think, is it just me losing you, Matt?
I'm losing slightly, but I think that the question was, because we can provide that supportive framework and monitoring, that could that as a cost of joining the charter programme be put into the NPO application?
Yes, and also if that yes, absolutely, and if that needs to be budgeted in, if that is something that you know, that our organization would have to pay you, basically.
Yes, so the charter programme comes at a joining fee. It starts at £500 for smaller organisations, but then goes obviously by turnover going up, increases as well. But Joe, I'll hand over to you in that sense, that joining organisations who provide certain services, that is something that the Arts Council is absolutely open to see in the applications in a commitment. Is that right?
Yeah, that is what the Arts Council spokesman told me. They would be happy to see budget lines in your NPO application that support your data collection or your development plans. And I think that in any application for any kind of funding, your budget should tell the same story as the application that you're writing. So whatever you say you're going to be doing, there should be something in the budget that shows that you thought about the cost of that. So that would be my advice.
Yeah.
That I think you should think about what's the actual cost of that, whether that's cost of the subscription to PiPA, for example, or whether that's the cost of the staff that you might have to give extra hours to collect the data, whatever that cost to you in your specific organization, what that might be. I think you should consider putting that in as a budget line. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was muted. I just said thank you. Yeah, thank you.
That's okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
I've seen, I know Matt has put it a couple of times in the chat, just so you know, the recording as well as the slides, we will send through to everybody as well, so that you can have the slide deck. And I think there was a question about the practices that we promote if they're on our website. So the best practice charter is on the website, which has almost like the let's say the headlines that are around it. Because if you talk about flexible working, for example, flexible working is an umbrella term that we advocate for, and within that we will then find for organizations the right structure that they would need for flexible working. First of all, understanding what flexible working is, providing a handy how-to guide and checklist, but also then actually identifying, is it really truncated hours we're looking for? Is it actually a job share? Is it part-time work? What is it that we are discussing within that certain situation? So not all practices are on the website simply because that would take the whole website, but actually the umbrella terms of recruitment, inclusive recruitment, flexible working, support through resources, or having leadership support the actual journey towards family-friendly practices are in the charter. Are there any other questions that are directly to us?
There was one for Joe. I am applying for an ACE project grant and wondered what sort of organisations would you suggest I approach to be in IPSO?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I was just reading that one. That's really difficult to answer without knowing what your project's actually about. I think it needs to be very specific to what your project is and what you're trying to achieve. I mean, obviously, I don't know who the IPSOs will be yet, because they have to apply in the same way that NPOs have to apply, and so we won't know till probably end of 2023 which IPSOs will be around. But there are some support organisations around already. So PiPA is one. Julie's Bicycle I mentioned before, who do specifically environmental responsibility action, and there are probably some others depending on the very specific needs of your project and what it's about, what you're trying to address.
I think one of the interesting parts here as well is something that we've been discussing is the Arts Council doesn't need to see before you apply that you have everything in place, and I think that's a really interesting point. What the Arts Council, and Joe, maybe you can explain it a bit further, what they're trying to see is that you are willing to go on a journey, that you are putting a strategic plan in place to say, by this year, we will have reviewed this, implemented that, or reached to certain communities. And this is a great opportunity to kind of think, what do I want to achieve in a certain, like setting the target in certain years, and which steps could I take to achieve it, which is where we as PiPA can help you identify sort of the journey and the steps. Joe, is that right? As my understanding of this?
Yes, that's right. I think it's important that you have some idea of your starting point. So you might have done some kind of audit or baseline survey internally on where you're starting from. So you've got an idea of maybe some of the gaps that you have, or some of the areas that really need improving, but also some of your strengths as well. So I think it's important to have that knowledge at the point that you apply as far as you can. So that when you say you've got a plan to address those, you know what it is you're trying to address. You've got some idea of how you're going to know if you've achieved that. But yes, I don't think they expect you to be implementing your plans at the point that you apply, but that you have some idea of what your plan will be should you get the funding, so that you can then make that improvement.
Thank you.
Can I just make a final point? There was just a little conversation in the chat about like the size of organisations, so smaller organisations joining the charter programme. And just with that, I'd just like to say that we have a whole range of, you know, really big organisations, but we also have really small organisations with small teams. And the process is the same, but in terms of actions and practical recommendations, it is all proportionate to the size of your organisation. So the recommendations that we will always make to charter partners is in respect of whatever their capacity or current agenda is. So we make the recommendations, and then you as an organisation get to look at that report and go, actually for us, with what we have or the direction that we're going, it's these sort of things that we're going to do. So, you know, we fully understand that it has to work within your organisation and what you're doing, and it has to fit sort of the DNA of who you are, because that's how change sort of happens. So it's the same process, but very much tailored to who you are and what it is that you want to achieve.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. We've come to the end of our session. My cat just jumped on the table just in time. So thank you very much. As always, if you have any more questions, if something wasn't clear, or if you just want to discuss your particular circumstance or organization, please get in touch. Matt, maybe put your email address one more time in here, but you should have it anyway. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much, Joe, for coming and sharing your knowledge. It's been really really helpful. And we hope to hear from you all again. The charter program is open for sign up. Later on this year, we'll also launch an introduction course as such. So keep your eyes out for that. But for now, I'll say goodbye, and I hope to see you, actually physically see you soon. Bye bye.